Thank you so much for being here. For those of you who don't know me, or maybe haven't heard of me, well, you've probably seen me around. I've been around for a long time. I've been doing this kind of stuff for a long time. Uh, for the last few years, what is going on with my slide? Just a moment. There it is. That's me. For the last few years, I've been an executive design leadership coach. I've been working with leaders of digital product design teams, helping them to level up their leadership skills and helping them to develop the strategies to lead their teams through these incredibly and increasingly interesting times. Uh, I got into that work actually at the tail end of my time at Capital One, which was an interesting experience for me to be an in-house design leader and helping that group to create, to build and scale an enterprise level design team and building that design team on a strong foundation of design culture. That design culture that we brought to Capital One came from the previous company that I was at, Adaptive Path, which is the U.S. consultancy that Peter and I co-founded back in 2001 when there really were not any UX consultancies, and we were still trying to prove that this work had value in the world. I was part of that. I was part of that whole enterprise for 13 years as we were out there teaching our methods and doing consulting work before we finally sold the company to Capital One. And before I got into Adaptive Path, as Peter mentioned, we were just hobbyists on the internet, and my interest, my focus was on content. I was a content strategist before people used that term. I was information architect when almost nobody had that job title, and that was the guy who actually came up with the elements of user experience. And we'll be talking a little bit more about him and his experiences in just a moment. But first of all, I want to get into what's not in this talk because it's actually this is the talk really goes a lot of places, but there's some stuff that I just had to leave out along the way. So what's not in this talk includes the 20 minutes of UX history, before and after elements, which I completely cut out of the talk. 20 minutes of background on AI, technology, and history. I cut that out too. Also 20 minutes of principles for effective prompt engineering, which is ultimately a big focus of this talk, which there just wasn't space for. Hopefully that talk will come along at a later date. Um, you will not find in this talk anything resembling a survey of the AI landscape. If I attempt to do that, I think we would be here all day. In fact, I'm really going to focus in on some very specific use cases for AI. I'm going to focus on LLM technology as that technology applies to digital product development, because that's the work that we've all been doing. And I really think that the LLM technology specifically is where the leverage point is and where the focus point ought to be for people who create digital products. And the last thing that you won't find in here is a great deal of complaining about misappropriation of my work that I have chosen to keep to myself. Um, if there's anything on this list that you really wish was here and you're feeling disappointed, well, all I have to say about it is, well, it's my party. And with that, we're going to move on to the origins of the elements of user experience. I want to talk a little bit about where this came from. Peter talked some about the impact of it, but that impact was really born out of a very specific environment, the environment of the tech industry in the year 2000. Now, at the time that I published Elements, the millennium itself is only a few months old. And the energy in the tech industry is enormous. There is so much money being invested. There is so much excitement and interest in the possibilities of new technologies, especially the new technology of the web. And the web is really the thing that is driving all of this interest and all of this energy. But the thing is, it's brand new. Nobody knows anything. Nothing has yet been proven. Literally everyone, from the smallest to the biggest companies, everyone is making up as they go. And it really feels like the only limit to what we can achieve is imagination. And this set of bullets sounds familiar to you. It might be because we're in a very similar moment right now with AI. But at the time with the web, it created this tremendous opportunity for people who knew the technologies, who understood the web, because so many people didn't. So if you wanted to go out and get somebody to design you a website back in the year 2000, what you probably needed was a design studio. You needed a group of professionals that you could hire and come in to do that work for you. Uh, the thing is that the clients have no idea how to actually buy this kind of work. They've never had to build a website before. They're getting all of this pressure from their investors and from the market and from the media telling that they have to have one. And they look around for somebody to make them a website, and they don't know how to buy digital design services, but they do know how to buy traditional graphic design work. And so these traditional graphic design agencies start expanding their offerings and repositioning themselves to be digital internet agencies. But the thing is, they don't know actually how to actually do that. So they've got to go find some basically some self-taught experts that find some people who have immersed themselves in these technologies and bring them into their design processes and bring them into the agencies to make a viable value proposition for the internet age. And so that's how I ended up at the San Francisco design firm Studio Verso, which was one of the small agencies in San Francisco that was doing a lot of this kind of work and having a lot of this kind of impact. So this was an amazing opportunity for me to join what was at the time a very small team that was doing work that was definitely getting noticed out in the world. There was just one problem. Nobody that I worked with, not my peers, not my bosses, not the clients, none of them had ever worked with somebody like me before because I was an information architect and I was there to advocate for very different things in the process than anybody was used to. So they don't know how I fit in. And I found myself showing up to meetings and looking around the table and realizing nobody knows why I'm here. Nobody knows why I'm bringing up the topics that I'm bringing up. And I realized that if I can't explain my value, if I can't explain what I'm there to deliver, I'm sunk. I'm going to be out of a job. I need a way to bring people in to the problems that I'm there to help solve, the decisions that I'm there to help clarify, and the larger value that I'm there to help deliver. So, what I need is to be able to bring them a structured way of making decisions together through dialogue. And so I started thinking about the decisions they're used to making as they work with their traditional graphic design agency practices and principles, and comparing that against the new decisions that we find ourselves making in the interactive environment. And I start making these lists of these different topics of conversation, basically, that would come up uh, in our client meetings. And I start kind of sorting these things. And it starts out as something that I wasn't able to find my original sketches, but it looked something like this, where I had these grids of ideas and I was trying to kind of sort things out. And I start really seeing this distinction between the areas where we're more in sort of the traditional kind of space where we're talking about content and typography and more of the kinds of things that are the clients and the agencies both were familiar with from other pre-digital media. But then there were all these layers of functionality being layered into the work that we were doing. And I was trying to figure out how all of these things fit together. And I kept kind of shuffling things around and nothing really quite seemed to work. And then one day I was on my way home from a business trip and I was walking through the airport on the way to my gate and it was as if my mind turned a corner and I suddenly was able to see something that I had not been able to see before. That if I took some of these stacks of ideas and rotated them around and flattened them out into planes, I could enable them to connect to each other in different ways that could capture all those relationships between ideas that I was seeing in my head. So as soon as I got on the plane, I pulled out my notebook and I drew this. And this was the very first three-dimensional view of the elements of user experience that I created. But as you can see, there is some stuff in here that I still hadn't quite figured out. So I got back to San Francisco and eventually produced this one. And this is the first fully realized sketch that I did that I shared internally with my team at Verso. And it was some version of this that I shared with Peter, and that eventually turned into this document, which was the original Elements of User Experience that was released publicly on the 30th of March 2000, almost exactly 25 years ago. Um, and this was Peter thinks it's interesting. He thinks I should share it. All I'm trying to do is solve my own problems here. I have no idea how other people are going to internalize or use what I'm doing here. And an important part to remember about this at this moment when I created this document is that almost nothing that's captured here had actually been defined yet. The ways that people use terminology were very murky, very fluid, very squishy. And perhaps the squishiest of those terms was user experience itself. It's a really important thing to remember that we kind of lose perspective on over 25 years, which is that at this point, when this document is created, user experience is a term that's in the air, but there's no acronym for it yet. UX even hasn't been coined. It's not a job. You can't go get a user experience job. There are no user experience processes yet. There's no user experience discipline. There's barely a community. No books, no courses. It's still just an abstract idea. And importantly, there are no politics attached to anything in here. This is all before people got so attached to these different labels and what they meant about our work. It was really, in some ways, a much more innocent time. So I want to take a minute and just walk through the model. I know that many of you are already very familiar with it, but I want to share with you, just kind of take you through it top to bottom so that we're all on the same page about what we're talking about here. Now, what I'll be sharing with you here is a slightly later version of the model that I developed for the second edition of my book in 2010. Because my early work, we were very much focused on the web. The web was what was driving all of the interest and the excitement and the activity. And so we were really trying to, my focus at the time was understanding the web as a medium. But what happened after that is that the ideas started finding their way into other pockets. And I came to realize that what I'd identified as being a basic duality in the nature of the web itself, between the web as a technology platform and the web as an information source, was actually inherent in all information technology, that these things are always tangled up together whenever we're doing digital product development. So the model is meant to support collaborative decision making, and it does that by organizing the decisions to be made. At the high level, it breaks these decisions down along a continuum from abstract at the bottom toward the more concrete toward the top, with the implicit idea that the decisions that you make on the lower planes are going to influence the decisions that you make as you move your way up. So starting on the bottom with strategy. Strategy is where it all begins. What do we want to get out of the site? What do our users want? Layered on top of strategy is scope. Scope transforms strategy into requirements, the features that the product will need to include. Structure gives shape to scope. It defines the page level pieces, or no, the flow across the pages and across the screens and through the user dynamics, how all of those pieces are going to fit together and behave. Skeleton makes that structure concrete at the page level, describing and defining the page level components that will enable people to use the structure and use the functionality. And then finally, at the surface level, at the very top, we have the first thing that we see with the product, which is the look and feel of it. So with this in mind, we can apply this fundamental duality between seeing a product as a technology platform, seeing a product as an information source, and we can split the planes right down the middle. And now we have a way to talk about narrower possibility spaces within each of these planes. And at the intersection of each of those planes and those high-level lenses or views on the problem, we now have some fairly narrow boxes where we can define exactly what we're talking about. We can define its relationships to the things around it. But as you can see, the three-dimensional nature of the model allows those things, they don't have to be rigid finitely constrained in these vertical arrangements. Elements can span these this vertical orientation. So that was the elements of user experience. Those are the basic ideas of it. The terminology evolved over time. The visualization changed a little bit. Um, but this was really the thing that took off back in 2000. And after I put it up on the web, some really interesting stuff started to happen. I started getting my own work coming back to me. Uh, First was Javier Velasco, who's here in the room with us today, who was the first person to create a translation of the elements of user experience. He translated it into Spanish. After that came Livia Labate, who did it in Portuguese. And then Antonio Volpone, who's also with us today, created the Italian version. And then after that, it's really started taking off. And then I got Slovenian and Vietnamese and Chinese and a whole bunch of other ones besides. As all of these individuals volunteered their time, their energy, their expertise, their multilingual capabilities to make this work more broadly available. And it was really such an extraordinary thing. And I just have to say thank you so much to the translators who helped bring this work to a global audience. That global interest eventually led to a book offer, and a publisher came to me and asked me if I wanted to turn this thing into a book. So I wrote the first edition of The Elements of User Experience in 2002, and almost entirely by accident, it actually turned out to make a really great textbook because of the structure, because of the way that it simplifies and organizes the decisions to be made in digital product design. It turns out to be a great way to introduce people to the field. And that's what this book has done for decades now. Whether people were assigned it as classwork, or they found it in a library, or they were handed this book by a friend, people who found this book found a path for themselves frequently. That led to a second edition in 2010, where I expanded the model again beyond the web and really just kind of talking about digital products more broadly. And then eventually, we have all of the editions all over the world, other translations, other languages. These are the ones that I personally own. I know that there are more out there that I haven't gotten my hands on yet. And all around the world, this work continues to provide an entry point for thousands of creative professionals. And I'm just so amazed and grateful at what I've seen it become. Uh, the inspiration that the Elements has created in the world has been really interesting thing to watch. For some reason, people keep wanting to redraw it. I There are dozens and dozens and dozens of examples of this kind of thing out there. Some of the models they sort of flatten it. They take the three-dimensionality out of it. To my mind, that kind of loses some of the what what makes it effective. But if that works for them, then that works for them. Other people they take the model and expand it to include things like activities and deliverables. Here's one that sort of rearranges the elements according to this person's ideas about how these things fit together. Here's a staircase. Here's a circle of circles. Here's another circle of circles. This one is fun because it's actually got circles within circles. We got a couple of versions of a birthday cake, all kinds of alternative visualizations of this same set of ideas, this same basic model. But far and away, the most popular way that people have chosen to visualize the elements of user experience has been all the damn icebergs. So many icebergs. I don't know what it is about the iceberg metaphor that people find so compelling, but yeah, there are a lot of them out there, all of these derivations. But it still feels like something important gets lost in the simplification of this already simple model. Um, and some people have taken that in a different direction. Some people have had bigger visions for this model. Here's one that adds a whole bunch of extra planes to it. Um, Notably, this one has programming down at the very bottom as a kind of the foundational plane. Here's another one that retains the planes from the elements of user experience, but puts programming on top. This one takes the planes and bends them around into a rainbow. Hello, Richard. Good to see you. This one is another one that's been popular lately that creates separations and kind of stacks on top of stacks with messy reality underneath. And all of this work really has added up to so much out there in the world. It's kind of overwhelming for me because what's been most impactful for me have really been the personal stories that I've heard from so many people over so many years. So many times I cannot count. I have been approached by strangers on street corners and train platforms and bars and restaurants and grocery store parking lots, people who have wanted to share with me what this work did for them. The way that it, in some cases, gave them an entirely new direction for their lives and inspired them to move towards something new for themselves. And for me, it has been the most rewarding and the most humbling part of this entire journey. And I thank you all so much for sharing your stories with me. So that's the story of what the elements of user experience did in the world. But let's look at the model itself and let's talk a little bit more about what really makes it tick. So as I look at the model, if I can separate myself from it a bit and ask what makes this so functional, so applicable in so many different contexts, I think it has to do with these properties that are kind of inherent in the structure of it. The first one is alignment. It breaks the problem space down into organized areas of concern. It then aligns those areas of concern with these different ways of looking at a problem. And then having established those things, we can then create balance within each of these planes as we reconcile and bring into alignment the different considerations that have to come together for each plane to be addressed as we move up the stack. That enables us to focus each individual domain, each individual area to create clarity where we can identify the constraints. As you can see with the model, the decisions that you make on each plane inform and constrain the decisions on upper planes. So you have constraints cascading up the model and dependencies cascading down. And all of this ultimately creates for a team and for an organization decisiveness, this forward momentum toward resolution at every plane, at every stage through the process. And that's how you get elements. A tool for breaking down a complex problem into discrete possibility spaces. I talk about this idea at a little bit more length in the book itself. This is an illustration from going all the way back to the first edition back in 2002, where I talk about having a range of possible choices, a possibility space within each plane. But the choices that you make within that possibility space constrain the range of choices available to you as you move up the stack. So if we take this idea and we apply it to the entire stack, we can see this kind of zigzag pattern that you end up having to follow in order to resolve all of these issues and to move through all of the possibilities. So the elements of elements, what it's good at, what it's good for. It's a tool for having better conversations about intentions and their implications. It creates shared understanding of relationships between decisions to be made. It's a map for turning possibilities into decisions in a goal-directed way. It systematizes qualitative, non-programmatic decisions, decisions that can't be made by a simple application of a policy or a script. It progressively narrows the possibility space as each set of decisions provides the context for the next. And it provides a way of teaching someone how to think through a problem with you. So this, in a summary, in my experience in talking with all the people who I've talked with about it, this feels like the essence of what makes elements work as a model. So we'll keep this in mind as we move forward. And let's talk for a minute about AI. Um, and I want to start out tell you a little bit about my own relationship with this technology because I've actually been kind of dancing around this stuff for a long time now. I've been thinking about talking about working with artificial intelligence for a number of years in the context of this definition, systems that adapt their behavior based on exposure to data. This is really the innovation that artificial intelligence and machine learning represent, is the idea that you can feed something a lot of examples and it can adapt and modify its own behavior based on that. And so I've been talking about systems kind of like this for a really long time. The farthest back I could find was a talk I gave back in 2004. Actually, if you saw any of the conference keynotes that I did in 2004 to 2006, you probably saw this talk. It was called The Frontiers of User Experience. And in that talk, I laid out a future for the web that involved a much greater intervention of technology. It started with what I called instrumented interfaces, basically like Geordie LaForge's visor, technologies that would enable us to see more and be able to more closely visualize the behavior of the users as they were engaging with our systems. I envisioned that those instrumented interfaces would eventually give us enough data that we could start to basically have the experience not be directed by ourselves, but rather be directed by a sort of invisible man behind the scenes, an algorithm that could shape experiences, customize those experiences to the needs of users. I also was careful to point out that there were some real ethical considerations having to do with user privacy associated with all of this. This was at the time a really frustrating talk for me to give because none of this stuff existed yet. And so it was all theoretical, it was all hypothetical. Uh, all of it eventually came true. What I call instrumented interfaces, we now know is analytics. And this has been the foundation of so many practices and principles in digital product design and development for so many years now. Uh, we got the algos. What didn't happen, what I didn't expect was I really thought designers would be the ones crafting algorithms. I really thought that design would be the one that kind of setting the rules by which these experiences evolved. I didn't see the rise of growth hackers and and other kind of people involved in the process who were maybe not taking as user-centered an approach. And yeah, I did not see an entire industry doubling down on schmethics. Um, the These questions of privacy and safety have not really been as much of a concern for enterprises as I had hoped back in 2004. My next encounter with this world of AI was on a project that I did with Mozilla Labs back in 2007, 2008. For more than a year, I led a team of designers from Adaptive Path, combined with technologists from Mozilla and other outside contributors to develop a vision of the web in the far future year of 2018. And I'm very proud of this work. There is a ton of stuff in here that we absolutely uh, predicted it was coming, and it came. But the one piece that didn't really materialize was actually the centerpiece of the whole project, the centerpiece of the whole idea, which was that your web browser would itself be an AI system, a co-pilot for your entire internet experience. And the entire time you're engaging with internet with the internet, the system would be finding patterns and connections across your behavior, across your work rhythms, and clustering like with like and semantically organizing your own personal information space according to what was most relevant for you. So a search for weather would be very different depending on whether you were currently focused on planting your spring garden or planning your next ski trip. So a few years later, I find myself at Capital One, and I'm very invested in the work that we're doing in creating a human-centered design organization. So somewhere along the way, I have this insight, and this comes up for me because AI is very much in the air at Capital One during the time that I'm there. They've made a huge investment in machine learning. They're developing all kinds of things. There are new ideas coming out of the organization left and right. And for us as the leaders of the design team, we were very motivated for the design group to be out in front of this and have a strong point of view on this. So uh, we start spinning up all kinds of initiatives to jump in and really drive machine learning from a user-centered point of view. Uh, One of these was Eno, was our customer service chatbot, which was really there was an incredibly sophisticated creative work that went into developing a machine learning algorithm that would be responsive to the emotional state of a conversation with users. Unfortunately, a lot of that work never saw the light of day. There is a product out there called Eno. It's not the thing we made. Um, our Adaptive Path Events team ran an event series called Humanity.ai for a number of years, where we were bringing together experts at the convergence of UX and AI practices to try to drive some insight and drive some leadership in the organization. And then one of the very last things that I did with Capital One, I spent more than a year as the head of their responsible AI team, as I was helping them to build up a team that could preemptively reduce harm through internal governance with a heavy emphasis on transparency, explainability, really being able to deeply understand how these technologies were impacting the users of our services. So this stuff has all been in my head for a long time. As I was working on the responsible AI work, there was one quote that came from this is something I said in one of our team meetings that has stuck with me as ever since as I've been engaging with AI. I said, people think this is about being a dog trainer, but it's actually about being a lion tamer because the difference is that you can finish training a dog. You're never finished taming a lion because the lion is never actually fully tame. And that principle has stuck with me throughout all of the work that I've done with AI since then. Um, so around this time, something really important is happening, which is that AI is becoming super scalable. These two research papers changed the entire landscape. In 2014, Alex Krizhevsky proves that you don't need big supercomputers like IBM was building in order to process neural networks. All you need are a whole lot of graphics cards. And then in 2017, this group of folks pulls together the transformer model, which is a software architecture that enables even greater scalability. So now all of these things that were only theoretical in the 20th century suddenly become real. And so all you need is a lot of money to build a great big data center and then a lot of data to feed it. And so these big initiatives, they start feeding massive amounts of data to these algorithms. The goal is for them to basically build up this big ball of math that literally all it's there to do is to predict the next word in a sentence. It started out as just chat, but then this is the amazing thing that happened. Uh, it turns out that this thing is good at way more than just chat. It was never programmed to do math, and yet it can do math. In fact, if you can turn almost any kind of a problem into something like language, you can use an LLM to explore it. This is why so many of our modern AI products and features have LLMs at their core, even if chat is not the interaction model. So now we have everyone chasing the market opportunity out there with reckless abandon. And the abandon is indeed reckless. The data that these models are trained on, it comes from everywhere and anywhere, frequently without permission, frequently by questionable means, questionable sources. There is a lot of shady business in AI, and we have to acknowledge the truth of that. There are significant concerns about the choices that these companies have made with regard to fair use. There continue to be significant concerns about the meaning of this technology for people's jobs and livelihood. There are significant concerns about the climate impact of this technology. And I imagine that there are some industries where AI is actually never going to make that much of an impact. But for those of us who work in digital product design, digital product development, I think we have to engage with this as a new raw material for us. So here's a metaphor that comes to mind when I think of AI as a raw material. This is the Play-Doh Fun Factory. This is a favorite toy of American middle-class children for decades. It provides a way of turning the undistinguished ball of goop that you get in a can of Play-Doh and turn it into a more interesting shape. So this is basically how an LLM works. They've made the great big ball of math. It's your job to stick it in the press and line up the little extruders so that you get something that is kind of the shape that you want. And that as a metaphor is really what underlies all kinds of LLM products. So in this raw state as a big ball of math, just built on public data sources, the LLM can't focus its responses enough to be effective. It's just all over the place. So if we want to get something effective out of it, we've got to squeeze it down. The first stage of that squeezing is the pre-training. So the P in GPT. GPT stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer. Transformer is the underlying technological architecture. Pre-training is what they do to shape it into something that is actually usable by people, but usable across a pretty broad range of use cases. So if we want to narrow it to a more specific use case, we need to layer in what are called system prompts. And so most of the AI products that you see out there that are built on LLMs have embedded in them system prompts that narrow the focus, that give more shape and direction to the work of the LLM. And then it's the job of the user to provide additional context and then additional iteration of their prompting to continue to refine and hone this down until ultimately you get something that is so focused that you can turn this sort of big diffuse light into a laser beam to actually get something done. So if you have the right context in place, if you've set your context narrowly enough, you can keep the randomness that is part of these models in check. Now, some people think like, well, what if we just maximize context? And what if we had infinitely large context windows and these incredibly huge underlying LLMs? Wouldn't that solve the problem? Well, this interesting thing happens if you feed an LLM too much context. You get this thing that I call context overload sickness. The thinking of the machine starts to get a little bit blurry. I've seen LLMs literally fall into analysis paralysis because they're trying to piece together too many things from too many directions, or they just sort of go off on a tangent that has nothing to do with anything that you're talking about. This is a well it's a broadly seen but poorly understood phenomenon that shapes how we engage with this technology. Um, Another metaphor that I like to use when thinking about these LLMs and what they can do for us is what I call the magic Cocoa Puff machine. So, Cocoa Puffs, delicious breakfast cereal here in the United States, little little chocolatey balls of goodness. Um, if you imagine that your LLM is a magic Cocoa Puff machine that can produce just ongoing infinite quantities of Cocoa Puffs, that would be a pretty great thing, whether you are just a personal cereal consumer or you're in the cereal business. Um, but there's just one trouble with the magic Cocoa Puff machine, which is that at random, unpredictably, every once in a while, you don't get a Cocoa Puff out of the machine. You get this. These are not Cocoa Puffs. This is rabbit poop. Visually indistinguishable from a Cocoa Puff. If you can't tell the difference between a Cocoa Puff and a rabbit poop, you're going to have a hard time operating the magic Cocoa Puff machine. The randomness built into the system creates this probabilistic nature such that you've always got to be watching your rabbit poop to Cocoa Puff ratio. Because every once in a while, it's going to make something that looks exactly like food. It looks exactly like what you want, but it's not what you want, which means that if you can't tell the distant difference, you should not be trusting the machine to. The danger of turning to the machine for expertise is that you're going to miss something, right? So you have to bring your own rabbit poop detector. You have to be the one to be able to identify where the machine has gone off track and have opinions about what works and what doesn't. You can't ask it to know things that you don't, because what it will always be best at is mediocrity. By its nature, it needs your guidance to be successful. It does not know anything. It does not understand anything. It simulates knowledge, it simulates understanding, but all it actually wants is your approval. This is the way these systems have been trained. This is the way these systems have been built. It is your responsibility to choose when you give that approval and in response to what. So let's talk about how elements can help you out with this. I'm going to start out by talking about AI for UX. In other words, the application of AI tools in the context of UX practices, in the context of digital product design and development. Now, everything I'm going to say here actually also applies to UX for AI. If you're doing UX for AI products, you're going to be dealing with some similar considerations. But I want to start here with these three big ones. I want to talk about use cases, talk about workflow, I want to talk about prompt craft. So use cases. When it comes to applying this technology in the context of UX development, it really is about identifying the use cases where there are opportunities to augment decision-making as opposed to replacing it, to continue to have design expertise driving, but not trying to create a substitute for design expertise. Because what we find, I mean, this is just the way that this is what I'm seeing unfolding in the organizations that I've been working with. In a lot of ways, it's very similar to the patterns that I've been seeing across digital product for a long time. At the heart of digital product design is a struggle, a tension between what's best for users and what creates growth for the business. Everybody who has worked in this field has been caught in this tug of war for the last 25 years. So if you want to see digital products become more user-centered in the next generation, you have to understand that in an AI-enabled workflow, whoever controls the prompt controls the product. This is so important to emphasize. Whoever controls the prompt controls the product. The language that is used to describe the terms and conditions of the product, the requirements of the product, are going to be more directly connected to the outcomes than ever before. So it is on digital product design teams to come forward with a strong point of view on the product opportunity, on the user opportunity, and how to capitalize on that by cultivating prompt work as a team-wide craft discipline. And this is why I use the term prompt craft instead of prompt engineering, because as far as I've seen, this stuff doesn't feel like engineering yet to me. It does not have the level of mathematical certainty that I want in engineering. It feels to me a lot more like throwing pottery than welding steel. But this is fine for digital product design because we have always been craft people. And what we know is that craft is an improvisation, not a mathematical certainty. It is a dance between maker and material. And it is absolutely the rhythm and pattern of engagement that's necessary with these technologies. It is iterative problem framing. So an ideal prompt engineer for digital products is going to bring a mix of technical savvy, awareness of the technologies and how to use them, user insight, the ability to understand the perspective of the people who use the things we create, experience visualization, and then lastly, linguistic expression, to be able to turn all of that into words that you can feed to a machine and get a meaningful outcome. So looking at how elements applies in the realm of AI for UX, you can use the elements model to break down your use cases, to find the use cases across your development process where there are opportunities to augment expertise. You can use the technology to perform gap analysis, to notice where your alignment is broken up and down the stacks of the model. You can use it to reconcile those trade-offs within the planes to create balance between your information design and your interface design, for example. Other kinds of synthesis and pattern finding. This piece is actually a really important piece that I haven't heard a lot of people talk about. If you're dealing with an AI-enabled workflow, you're going to need human machine readable documentation of your ideas that is easy for a machine to consume, but is also something that's usable by the humans on your team. Because once you have that, then it becomes very easy to generate baseline implementations to create prototypes, functional demonstrations of your UX ideas. So the way that I see this playing out is that there's this line that cuts across the center of the model here. And above this line, what we're going to be leveraging in order to do this work are design systems. It's hard for me to imagine design systems 10 years from now not having an LLM as a primary interface. It seems to me to be the natural evolution of these systems for them to be ultimately something that you talk to, that creates a design for you. But in order for you to do that, you've got to show up with something. You've got to show up with something that the system can use and make sense of. And that's where the data structures come into play, down on the bottom level. So these formalized ways of structuring data that enable easy ingestion into a design system that can create a user experience, that's the flow that I ultimately see all of this taking. Now, that sounds like something that doesn't have any real kind of human factor in the mix at all. But I think that there are these four really important things that humans bring into this work. The imagination, the ability to see something that could never be. Intuition, the ability to see something that cannot be proven. Inspiration, the ability to connect one way of seeing with another. And insight, the ability to see something from someone else's perspective. So now let's talk about how this plays out in the context of doing UX for AI products. So in the context of these architectures that I've been talking about, AI product strategy is basically about identifying a use case, aligning that use case with the correct model, wrapping the right system prompts around it to focus that model on that use case, and then embedding that within a larger user experience. And so almost every LLM-based product that you see out there is following this same basic template. And as we look at how elements comes into play in the design of these AI systems, overwhelmingly, the big challenge here is that nothing is 100% predictable anymore. You have to be able to design for probabilistic behavior and outcomes. Because of that probabilistic nature of it, the user interaction is not as straightforward. You need to create space in your apps for patterns of play and experimentation and user learning, not just machine learning. One of the easiest ways that you can do that is just make it really easy for people to backtrack, to lower the cost of errors, to make it easy to make mistakes. One thing that I find is interesting in here, as much as we've heard recently about so-called multimodal AI, where you've got users engaging with AI across multiple interfaces, even if you're not engaged in a chat experience, dialogue still ends up being the fundamental behavior pattern that we see in this, again, sort of this dance between the user and the machine. Information architecture. Information architecture is absolutely vital to data quality and machine consumability. You don't get that human machine readable documentation without information architecture. You don't get a lot of the benefits of LLMs without information architecture. All of this kind of adds up to more gardening and less bricklaying. It is a much more sort of organic approach to product development than we've seen before. So as I've been working with design leaders over the last few years, I've been talking with them about how they are engaging with AI and seeing the challenges that they're facing, and a model of an AI transformation journey for product development teams has started to emerge for me. So if we look at sort of scale of effort or team involvement, and we map that out over time, this is kind of the steps along the journey as I see it. At the beginning, you've got to assess the opportunity, identify your use cases, find the places where acceleration can deliver value. Then you've got to square those use cases with your actual workflow and your actual technology. So if you are standardized on certain platforms that are easily interact with LLMs, you're going to have different sorts of options available to you than if you're standardized on other ones. Out of that, build up some hypotheses, design an experiment, try some stuff out, prove out your ideas, and start refining your prompt craft. Because as you move up the steps of this, the prompt engineering is really where it's going to come in. Uh, Take that experiment out to a pilot. Integrate new tooling in your workflows in a narrow, controllable context. Keep refining and capturing those learnings so that you can eventually upskill your team, scale the capabilities of your team, teach them what you've learned about how to engage with the system to reduce that randomness and to produce more reliable results so that you can eventually roll it out across all of your workflows and across all of your work streams. So this is the journey that I see folks on. But in order to get to the higher level stages of that journey, you're going to need some infrastructure. You're going to need prompt architecture, a way for people to collaboratively work with prompt language to create consistent results. You're going to need a structured way of making decisions through dialogue. In this case, dialogue between humans and machines. So, prompt architecture, what does that look like? Characteristics of an effective prompt architecture solution. It would be a tool for having better conversations about intentions and implications. It would create shared understanding of relationships between decisions to be made. It would be a map for turning possibilities into decisions in a goal-directed way. It would systematize qualitative, non-programmatic decisions. It would progressively narrow the possibility space as each set of decisions provides the context for the next. It would give you a way of teaching someone or something how to think through a problem with you. In other words, if you're creating prompt architecture at scale, you're going to need something that looks a lot like the elements of user experience. I want to share with you one brief example of what I'm talking about. This is a diagram from an academic paper. It came out just a little over a year ago, December 2023. It describes an advanced prompt engineering technique called tree of thoughts. Um, and this is an approach to prompt architecture that involves constraining options at each stage of the decision-making process and making decisions that set up constraints downstream in your prompt flow. Now, if this diagram looks familiar to you, it's because you saw something very similar about 45 minutes ago. This one from my book in 2002. Now, because their model goes from top to bottom and mine goes from bottom to top, I'll help make it a little more clear. I'll spin mine around and you can see that, in fact, these two diagrams describe exactly the same idea. This is the state of the art of prompt engineering right now. The idea of creating a tool for breaking down a complex problem into discrete possibility spaces. A tool that can drive alignment and balance and clarity to create decisiveness together, humans and machines. So this was supposed to be the last slide of the talk. But as I was working on the talk and thinking about these ideas, looking at this diagram that I've spent so much time looking at, and all at once, it was as if my mind turned a corner and I could see something that I hadn't been able to see before. And I wondered, what if what's most important about the elements of user experience has nothing to do with user experience at all? What if what's most important about the elements of user experience is what it has to say about structured decision making. What if this model were just a prototype for an entire universe of models? I can imagine models that have more depth to them, where you could actually create not just a continuum going top to bottom, but a continuum along the z-axis as well. Or models that break things down into even more planes and even more subdivisions. Larger and more complex and more intertwingled models. A whole universe of ways of capturing possibility spaces, of planar concept models. A tool for collaborative human decision-making, human-machine decision-making in complex problem spaces. It would have these characteristics: a three-dimensional model organizing decisions into domains, grouping those domains into horizontal planes according to shared concerns, aligning those domains vertically with the upstream domains they constrain, separating vertical stacks of domains according to a shared view of the problem space, and organized in a bottom-to-top progression of decision resolution. So that's as far as I got. I literally don't know what happens next. There are a lot of variables in all of this. What I do know is that where this goes from here is up to all of us. There's extraordinary possibility for us to do great things with this technology and to create a lot of harm. But I believe that we, as creative people, with our imagination, intuition, inspiration, and insight, can develop the craft needed to guide this technology, leveraging everything it can do for us while also leveraging everything that we bring that comes from being human. Thank you all so much. All right, Peter. So as I mentioned, some of these ideas have come out of my recent work in my leadership coaching practice. I finally have reached the place where I have decided to spin out the AI work separate from my leadership coaching practice. And so I am announcing that I am doing AI transformation strategy consulting for digital product teams. So if you're interested in going deeper in any of the ideas with me, if you want to see how any of this stuff applies in your environment, I welcome you to go to my website at jessejamesgarrett.com/AI and grab an hour and let's see what we can do together. All right. Thank you all so much.